This is who we are. This is what made us what we are today, and will be the foundation of tomorrow. Connected by one shared vision, on the same mission, there is one thing that connects us, that makes us, us. It drives our hearts and minds, and our solutions for an easier, safer, and greener world across continents and cultures, different genders, ages, and abilities. We love different and feel different. We believe different, are different. This is how it should be, embracing different stories and ideas.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the Doones to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to The Anadromist. This is Burn Power, your anadromist, coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. And if this is the first time you've discovered this channel, you want to know where Tbilisi, Georgia is, look it up on a map. I thought we would do something a little different today. Well, everything I do is a little different from everything else I do. I like doing that, keeping things different. Making it interesting for me, and I hope for you as well. So rather than have I watch enough channels, and I see people do these things, they have the same, branding, doing everything exactly the same. I do a couple things the same, and then I like to throw things off. I just did that video that was all clips from thinkers and artists that I appreciate. And it was just all them talking. And it took the pressure off of me, so I can give you this. And today, what we're doing is called Diversity versus Diversity. And I'll explain what I mean in just a moment. But before I get into this, someone needs to subscribe to the channel. Is it you? It's like televangelist. You need to give today. And you can actually give to the channel. There is a PayPal link below. And those who give more than $50 in one shot or $10 a month will get some audio extras sent to them. And if you haven't gotten yours yet, if you've recently donated, don't worry, they're coming. And the other thing, share, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Okay, let's go. There are two models of diversity out there right now. One model is the model that's often discussed under the heading of diversity, equity, inclusion. The other model doesn't even like to call itself diversity, but it actually is. And so I thought I would discuss the difference between these two versions of diversity. These are just preliminary thoughts. You may have your own, and feel free to add them in the comments. So I think the first version, the diversity, equity, inclusion version, sees diversity as a collection of types. And these types should include those who have been traditionally marginalized by Western society. So that would include Black, Hispanic, women, gay, lesbian, trans, disabled, fat, and I'm sure you can come up with other classifications. The one group who has been traditionally in power is considered to be white European ancestry. So white Europeans are essentially those who are in power. And one of the thoughts behind this is that those who are of Western European culture, well, essentially Western European culture is seen as the cause of all of the systems of oppression. Now, I'm not going to argue about whether these things are true or not. This is just how I see their version of diversity, what diversity is to these people. A little more light. Sun kind of comes in and out, so I may adjust the light on occasion. As you can tell, I kind of like dramatic shadows and lighting. Chiaroscuro. The older school of Western European culture, with its emphasis on the rights of the individual and the older word equality, which was more of a political idea, as opposed to the newer word equity, which is more of a it's a very visual thing. It's like leveling the playing field for everyone. So essentially the group who is in power is the white Western folks of white Western ancestry are essentially being asked to voluntarily take a back seat in today's world. Now, whether this will happen, that's another issue, isn't it? My own thought is, like it's a rainy day in hell. No, it's not going to happen. Even the people who are all supposedly white allies, they're largely, they're not the kind of people who will actually give up their power. But they will speak a good they will look sufficiently, what should I say, prostrate. They will get on their knees to these ideas, but in actual fact, they're not going to stop sending their kids to elite schools. They're not going to stop helping each other get a leg up in the world. It's just life. How can I say this? Because I'm not one of them. That is to say, I'm Polish, Scottish, Norwegian, and Ukrainian ancestry. None of those people are particularly powerful. And the truth is, whoever my relatives were bequeathed unto me poverty growing up. Not super bad poverty, but enough that, I knew I was I wasn't physically on the wrong side of the tracks, but I didn't have the advantages. And those with the advantages tend to keep them. And it's just life. I don't feel any particular envy over those people because I know they have their own issues that they deal with. But the new rule is that intersectionality is the key to relationships. Intersectionality meaning that it's not enough to simply say, I'm a feminist. It's not enough to say, if you're a white feminist, you have to admit that the black feminist, the black woman, has had more oppression than you. And these oppressions intersect. So a disabled black woman would have far more problems than a healthy white middle class woman. And so the healthy white middle class woman would have to submit a bit, get down, allow the voice of the oppressed person to speak. And I think this is what we mean by equity. And of course, notice that it's essentially being asked to happen, but it's not being asked, it's being promoted. And there's a big difference to that. And essentially it's saying to promote equity, we have to allow the less privileged voices to be heard first. Okay, there are times in which that's a good thing to do. Not always. If you have, I'm not going to go into examples. But essentially, there are certain factors that also go into this. So, white groups who have been traditionally marginalized, particularly in America and other countries, everyone has their own groups that have been marginalized. You can think of what it is for your country. But in America, the Irish have been marginalized, the Poles have been marginalized, Catholics in general have been marginalized, and the rednecks, the Hicks, those people who lost the Civil War, and the what would be called poor white trash, which I have a bit of that ancestry in me on the Scottish side. I fully accept that, poor white trash ancestry, redneck, whatever. And it's not a big part of my thinking, but the truth is, it's there. And the truth is, when you look at the media, it is always open season on rednecks. That is to say, they can do nothing right. Any other group would be laughed at, but the rednecks are kind of like, yeah, let's go ahead and get them. But whatever, they're all considered to be privileged white Europeans, which is kind of a blanket statement, but nevertheless, in this idea of intersectionality, diversity, inclusion, and equity, they are all considered to be basically on the same level as the gentry, which I find to be ridiculous. If you know anything about, a lot of people say, yeah, Baltimore's a really crazy place with a lot of poverty, and a lot of you are thinking black people in that poverty. The truth is, Baltimore has huge sections of white poverty as well. And what's going on with all those meth labs across the country? Who do you think's doing that? Sometimes there's black folks doing it, but a lot of times that's white poverty. So, but nevertheless, because of the color of one's skin, one is considered to have privilege in this new version of equity. Jews are also considered to be white Europeans, which I think a certain group of National Socialists back in World War II would find very funny, because they didn't see them as white Europeans at all. And in fact, they saw them as the source of all the problems. Now, Jews are essentially considered to be among the more privileged classes, therefore white, as are, oddly enough, Asians in America. Now, what's funny is, evidently these people who are seeing this new version of diversity have forgotten that for instance, when the Chinese first came to California, they were called coolies, and they were sent to work in the gold fields. They were not sent to do gold mining. They were sent to do the washing. They were sent to, there's still places in California with names like China Camp. There was they were highly, highly discriminated against. What's one of the more fascinating episodes is that it was largely, coolie labor on the California side building the Trans-Pacific, the Transcontinental Railway that built the railroads. And when they took the picture in Utah of the meeting of the railroads, there's not one Chinese person in that photo. There's a lot of Irish people in that photo because they were a notch up, but not one Chinese person. Asian people have been tremendously discriminated against. However, Asians do something that other groups don't do, not to the same degree. And it's very similar with the Jewish folks. And that is, they really, really, really push their children to succeed, to make money, to get a good profession, to have a good family. And whatever else one can say, in both the black and white populations, poorer populations in America, these things are not being done. I've met rednecky type guys who just, they'd hear the word education and it was like, someone put a dead skunk under their nose. It's just, part of it has to do with the problems of the colleges, but part of it also has to do with the prejudice against the kind of, what happens when you get some larnin in you. But the same happens in, the hoods, where you find black poverty. And I've seen more than one, talk show on television where black women get up in arms because, are you saying I can't be a good mother just because I'm a single parent? And, well, yeah, you could be, but the truth is the evidence shows it's not happening. That is to say, the evidence shows a lot of just second, third, fourth generation poverty in communities that used to have families. A lot of this is more recent. A lot of people will blame slavery on this, and yes, it does go back to slavery, the roots of this. But in fact, if one was to come to the 1950s in America, one would see that black families were, not completely intact, but largely intact. And so it is very strange that the kinds of people who push their children to succeed are essentially considered to be too privileged to have much of a voice. You can really see this with Harvard's direct discrimination against Asians, because if they just let Asians in, well, most of the college would be Asian, which it's just really strange. To which I'm sitting there going like, well, so let everyone get educated to the degree that they want to be. What's the problem with that? So we find ourselves in this new version of diversity. It's more interesting what is visually important. Now, I've used the word oppression, and oppression is often used as the linchpin word that tells you who has more of a right to speak. The more oppressed you are, the more of a right to speak you have. To which I'm sitting there saying, with Polish and Ukrainian ancestry, it's like, okay, I get the whole problems with slavery and all the millions of people who died as a result of it. That gives you a lot of right to speak. But as a person of Ukrainian ancestry, half the population of which died by about the year 1950 in the 20th century because of all the craziness in that part of the world, that should rate kind of high on the oppression stack. But it doesn't. I'm considered to be essentially the same as an active racist, which I am not. To my knowledge, I have no racist bones in my body. I grew up, I spent 4 years of my life in Honolulu, California. Why not? Honolulu, Hawaii. Before there were a lot of skyscrapers there. This was quite a while ago. And there's a photo of me with my first grade class or whatever, and I'm in the minority. I'm white. Everyone else is either Asian or Hawaiian. And there's some other kids of a browner shade. Hey, I just consider everyone to be normal. I didn't run into this problem until I got to California, and then not immediately, because California has a kind of a very cool version of segregation. And eventually you figure out that, Richmond and Oakland are over there for a reason, and stick with your own. But that's something that you learn later in life. So, but here's the thing about oppression, is that you have to learn, if we follow this model of oppression, a white woman should always defer to a black woman because the white woman has more privilege. A trans woman, male to female, has been more oppressed than a black woman. So the black woman should defer to the trans woman. Different types need to be promoted in the media. Now here's the thing, is what I mean by types. I mean a type of person, a type of image, a type of individual. But it's largely a visual type. I mean, you can see that, this person is trans. I mean, you can say that, well, you're not supposed to notice that. You're just supposed to accept them as a human being. But in fact, it's a visual category. It's quite clear that there are many people who are non-binary who are supposed to be accepted for who they are. You're not supposed to question any physical attribute. And yet it is exactly the physical attributes that we're being asked to accept as normal. And in this, there's a definite goal in amongst the movements to put pressure on the mass media and entertainment to promote this idea of equity as equity and diversity and inclusion. But it's a very specific idea of equity, diversity, inclusion. It is not. I first started running into this back in, I lived in New York City for 16 years. You cannot find a more diverse place. I mean, seriously. And I used to go all over the city. I would go to Koreatown. I would go to the Orthodox Jewish boroughs of New York. I would go out to the Russian areas of Brooklyn. I would, well, I guess that's really Queens, or is it Brooklyn? So Coney Island is Brooklyn. Anyway, I would go to, just different places. I'd eat all sorts of different kinds of food. I'd meet I had friends who were all sorts of categories. Pretty much every color. I had a friend that shade, and they all had different ideas too. It wasn't like they were all the same kind of person at all. And you learn to be deferential in the good sense of saying, like, well, so you're Muslim and you have this idea, and this other person is upper class gentry. They have that idea. They're different than me too. But now what's happened is diversity is seen more as a physical representation. And I was saying, I first really ran into this. I got to Alaska. Now, I'd heard the word diversity prior to this in New York City. It's like, we respect the diversity of all individuals in New York City. You'd hear the politicians say this sort of thing. But, I got to New York City, got to Alaska, small town, Haines, and I lived there for 22 years. But when I first got there, there was a woman who had, Alaska is full of refugees from the recent past. And there was a woman who, well, let's just say she had connections with the Weather Underground. And she had been in Alaska, and I met her. Sweet woman, a dear friend. But at one point she said to me, the thing I like about Alaska, the only problem I have with Alaska is there's not enough diversity here. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, if you mean I can't get a decent Chinese meal, yeah. If you're saying there's not enough gays and lesbians, yeah. And so, did you notice that there happened to be a huge gap between the natives, the Tlinkits, of whom there are 2 tribes, and the rest of us? Did you happen to notice that there are people from the old gold rush families, that there are people who were World War II veterans at the time, that there were people who were Vietnam veterans, there were people who came up there to get back to the land, who were escaping because being a hippie was too hard in the lower 48. Did you notice that the kids were rather in a different world altogether? They were watching MTV. Did you notice that there were Christians of different stripes here? Did you notice there was a Mormon church here? Is that not diversity of all of these different kinds of people in this one place? Not only that, we got cruise ships and visitors every year from all over the world. What more do you want? Well, evidently it's the new idea she was already imbibing, and this was 1996. And but I felt at that point there's something wrong with the word diversity, because you're missing the actual diversity that's here. If you can get along with all these different kinds of people who go across the spectrum politically, and Haines was a very divided town politically, but it also divided in many different ways. It wasn't just left-right. It was native, non-native. It was, young, old. It was, summer workers versus people, townies. If you didn't get that picture, then you're missing something. And this is the second version of diversity, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's the version that is not accepted in mainstream dialogue. And what's interesting is that television these days does this weird thing with what I call mandatory diversity casting. I didn't make that up. I heard it somewhere, but it fits. And that is, you'll see this on Netflix all the time, where there will be a collection of people, high school students, young 20-somethings, and they hit all the different categories. There's someone black, there's always someone who's black, there's always someone who's of indeterminate ethnic origin or something that's not majorly black or something. Then there's at least one gay person or bisexual, LGBT representation. Sometimes there'll be a trans person. Here's what won't be there. There won't be people with different ideas. You will never find that much discussion. Or if you do, the discussion always is a slam dunk against anyone with a traditional mindset. And anytime they play the religion card, it's always the same. It always ends the same. And the way it ends is, it's like the ending of the series Lost, where it's all faiths are equal and such like this. There's no discussion of the actual ideas of any faiths. So the diversity is largely visual. It does not, absolutely not, N-O-T, huge letter, not include diversity of thought, which I find to be a real serious problem. So you can get all these types, and you're encouraged to recognize yourself as a type, as opposed to an individual. You are, I am a white, privileged male is very important to recognize, of European ancestry. The fact that I am a mutt, that it's mutt European, that I never had any economic advantage in life, that that there are people who are certainly white folks who are much poorer than I've ever been, isn't supposed to matter. It's just that you're supposed to recognize your type. And so if you're if you don't fit the category perfectly, you're in trouble. So a black man who voted for Donald Trump is considered literally to be, and I quote, the black face of white supremacy. Or this person is some kind of coon. They're putting on, whiteface, to use the old minstrel jargon. A woman who says that a woman is biologically unique and can't be imitated by a man is a transphobe, or they are transphobic. A trans man, that is to say, a woman who transitioned into being a man, who then detransitions back into being a woman, and there have been quite a few of these over the last year or two, who finally said, what was I doing? Wake up, seriously, not just woke, but actually they wake up, and then they suddenly say, I can't keep doing this. This is ruining me. This is biologically destroying me, which is what the medication does. But they are considered to be, to have submitted to trans conversion therapy. And the word conversion therapy is supposed to, give you kind of like heebie-jeebies from the Third Reich. Not that I ever think there was that implication to it, but that is what the implication is supposed to be underneath. The dog whistle, so to speak. A woman who wants a family, just a normal woman who just wants a family, is considered to be a birthing person in a natalist cult. And I've heard both those phrases used. Birthing person. And in fact, we've started seeing political figures use this tortured language to describe, I assume that eventually we're going to be describing men as sperming persons It's just like, yeah, a person with who menstruates. We've heard this phrase because people we've gone crazy. So this is really a diversity of oppressed types as images, but it brooks no diversity of thought. So it's impossible to be a black man who voted for Trump. That would just be, you hear these words like internalized white supremacy. Internalized gets way overused. Internalized misogyny and all of this sort of stuff. Stockholm syndrome. That these people, it's like they have no free will, they have no agency, they are just submitting to the dominant power of the white supremacy. And that word, white supremacy, is doing an awful lot of work. It doesn't mean that what it traditionally meant, which is, like the KKK and Nazis and all that. It doesn't mean that at all. It means anyone who's essentially white who has privilege. And since all white people have privilege, they are all white supremacists. That's a little stretchy, isn't it? And should be rejected as a definition. And one of the things I think, I saw a recent interview with, the Biden's press secretary, Psaki, and there was a whole thing back and forth, and she used the word white supremacy. And why doesn't any reporter simply stick his hands up or her hands up and say, would you please define white supremacy for us? Because I think if people understood the actual elasticity and stupidity of this definition, they would sit back like, well, no, that's not white supremacy. That's just being, a person of European ancestry. And you're saying we're all white supremacists. The mind boggles. But here's the thing. This vision of diversity has captured the commanding heights of the culture. The media, news, education, entertainment, corporations, and big tech social media. And these are all the areas we live in. Do you live outside here somewhere? Do you not watch the news? Do you not watch do you not participate in public education? Maybe some of you are homeschoolers, which would be a way to try to get out of that. Entertainment, the big corporations like Gillette doing those ads, all the different woke advertising that we're seeing now. No, these people, and invariably someone will say, yeah, but what about Fox News? To which I'm sitting there going like, yeah, it's like, okay, you got 5% of all the channels. And the other 95% go to the woke media. And I know what the problem is. As long as there's these people who in their own propagandistic way are right-wing, and I would say a very commercialized version of right-wing, the diversity, exclusion, and inclusion, diversity, exclusion, thank you. Diversity, inclusion, and equity people are going to be up in arms as long as there is one non-diverse, quote-unquote, thing left. So if you're doing something historically said in the past, you have to change the past. We don't want to see, for instance, Scotland is notorious for passing all of these diversity laws. And there was a guy who challenged the Scottish Parliament. How come there's not enough brown people there? But Scotland has been notoriously woke in all of this. And to which, one just simply looks at Scotland. I think it's like 97% white. And really pale white at that. Oh, you Scots, you know who you are. It just makes no sense, Anyway, so let us move on to version 2. Now, in version 2 of diversity, which I would classify as the old idea of diversity of opinion, diversity of background, diversity of character, essentially that idea that came with the Constitution of the United States, that came with the liberal, in the proper sense of the word, values of European culture. The ones that believed that a person had freedom of thought and freedom of speech. Essentially what's happened is you have people who are resisting now these new utopian ideals, and they are all considered to be by both the media and by they're considered by the media, and they're considered by education, they're considered by essentially all the commanding heights to be white supremacists. And what's ironic, of course, is that these forces are all being run by upper class liberal white folks, liberal in the more leftish sense of the word. But they're all considered to be white supremacists. And here's where, the ideas get all mixed up. Now, it is true that there are a few actual white supremacists out there. Neo-Nazis, KKK. They're out there. Other groups. For the record, anyone who thinks the Proud Boys is a white supremacist organization really needs to have your head examined. If you think the Proud Boys are a white supremacist organization, you really have been swallowing the corporate Drano. They aren't. But the reason you think that is because the media is determined to paint all people who resist the new ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion as white supremacists. But remember, this is a definition which has been stretched to the breaking point. It's basically, not only is it every white person, but it's any person who supports the old white Western truly liberal, as opposed to the modern lefty liberal term, ideals of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of political association, freedom of religion. The kind of things that are in the First Amendment of the Constitution. But the truth is, even though there are some of these people, they are a teensy minority in America and the UK and other countries, and really have no power. Now, they would like to. People like Richard Spencer or David Duke or, these kinds of people would like to have more of a say. And in fact, when the media goes on its tirades, they push more people into that camp. But I think we're seeing less of that now. So, what have I got here? Got a weird shadow developing. I've got this plant, and the plant's shadow is hitting me in different ways. So every now and then I'll catch a glimpse of it, and I'll go like, what the heck's going on? Sorry. But what's been happening in the center left all the way to the right-wing spectrum, not including the really crazy folks down in the actual white supremacy end, that is to say the normal people from, say, Christian evangelicals and traditionally Orthodox Jews and but also the people who are very centrist, to all the way to defectors from the LGBTQ, defectors from the BLM movement, who are moving towards the center. There is something going on, which I think is the real story. I think this is what's fascinating. And this is very different from what the media portrays. And in fact, I would say one of the things that the mass media and the commanding heights want you not to see is what is happening in this huge zone between the actual right wing, not the neo-Nazis, the actual right wing, and the center left. In other words, what would have been considered normal in the 1990s. There is a zone here where, oh my gosh, there is another form of diversity. Now, these people won't come out and say it because the word diversity has been simply run into the ground by the ideologues. But nevertheless, I think it is worth looking at. Let me just give you some of the names or different kinds of people you will find who are resisting this new hydra of ideas, of ideologies. So, Glenn Greenwald is a respected reporter who is Jewish, gay, who broke the Edward Snowden story, who hated Trump, has turned around and come out against this ideology, this hydra of ideologies. He is against it. This guy is no right-wing ideologue. He has not become a born-again Christian. He is not a white supremacist. He is everything a white supremacist would probably hate. But the man is a respected reporter, and he's just like, the more he looked honestly at what was going on, the more problematic it became. Ariel Scarcella, a lesbian known for her videos dealing with sexual issues, but she has not been alone among lesbians of shifting alliances from the LGBTQ ideology to becoming a rejecter of the new hydra of ideas. Blair White is actually a trans woman. Passes quite well, I would say. And has taken a stand against the insanity of the gender cult, who, essentially are saying things like, they're just pushing these ideas as if they were the most normal thing in the world. Dave Chappelle has been increasingly taking on the gender cult aspect of the ideology. I think he will be taking on more aspects as well, because what's happening, there was a recent event where he went back to his old high school in, I believe it was his high school in Washington, D.C., where he grew up, and he was actually having kids call him a bigot. But you see, the kids are subject to the ideology in school. He is not. And he simply flipped the script on them. He's too big to cancel. Comedians are often on the front lines here, because a good comedian has to be sharp in skewering things. And it has to feel uncomfortable sometimes. Believe me, I am a Christian. I believe in God. I have heard George Carlin. I have heard Lenny Bruce. I have heard endless amount of atheist comedians skewering Christianity. To which my thought is, so let them speak. And maybe they have a point. Maybe there is a point of hypocrisy amongst us. Maybe we Christians need to listen to some of these people. I don't need to become an atheist, but I do need to listen. And I get a lot out of them. Interestingly, more and more old school feminists are realizing the anti-woman stance of the woke, particularly among the gender cult. And you can really see this with J.K. Rowling, where, she said a woman is a woman. She agreed with this other woman who got canceled for saying such a thing. And suddenly, there is some big Harry Potter conference taking place where everyone's getting together and talking about Harry Potter. And she is not at all going to be there. She is persona non grata among the people who live for her fiction. And I think it's kind of ironic, because she went out of her way to say, Dumbledore is really gay, and I think this other character is gay, and blah, blah, blah. And, you can't really feed the Hydra without being bit by it in the end. It's going to try to get you one way or another. All of us, actually, in the end. It's not exactly a friendly system. Joe Rogan is a classic pot-smoking, psychedelic libertarian, and yet has been open to all aspects of different discussions. He's had all sorts of people on his podcast. His podcast is the most listened to podcast on earth, certainly in the English-speaking world. But now he's under attack because he has said things like a woman who is trans, male to female, has no right competing against women in a sport like weightlifting. I mean, there was actually a weightlifter who was a trans woman who beat all of the female weightlifters. I wonder why. It's because you're a man. You've got all the biology of a man. I don't care how many hormones you take. You still got more upper body strength than any woman. Most women. But anyway, Joe Rogan has done that. He also did some things in relationship to shall we say, the C-19 situation. And so the media has been on him to, demonize him. But he's too big to demonize. He's too big to... Okay, hold on. Get you out. Okay, but he's too big to demonize. And this is the same with Dave Chappelle. Interestingly enough, what was Joe Rogan starting off as? A comedian. And I will say this. I have an old CD of Joe Rogan's before I ever found him in his podcast form. I wasn't a big fan of his comedy. It's edgy, but, I think he's doing a much better job now. But the point is this. He's finally had it. Recently, he got together with Tim Pool on Tim brought his RV that's all kitted out with a studio on it down to Texas, and Joe Rogan and Alex Jones and Michael Malice and Blair White and all these other people were all together, and Joe just comes in and just goes like, yeah, I'm sick of this stuff. Sick of just the fact that you cannot get real representation on the media for anyone who questions anything. But the point, as I'm saying, is the media has a stake in not letting you know that the people on the other side of their fence aren't all white supremacists. So, and of course, meanwhile, you have quite a few Asians who have come to understand what the new ideology means. And I've seen people who were Hindus, Chinese, Muslims, people of all different persuasions going like, yes, this is a problem. And we're not talking about the people from those countries. That is to say, we're talking about the European or American versions of these people. Sometimes they are from their country originally. But meanwhile, I can't even imagine this new diversity and exclusion. I keep wanting to say, I should just keep doing that. Diversity, exclusion, and equity idea. That is never going to make it in the Islamic world. That is never going to make it in the Hindu world. That is never going to make it in the Chinese world. That is not going to play well below the Saharas in Africa. And it doesn't play well in a lot of Hispanic Latin American countries. I just don't see it catching on. It catches on among the college educated who think they're superior. They aren't. They just have the ideas they've been propagandized with. And the problem is, see, if the media has control of all the outlets, they keep pushing this. But meanwhile, the movies come out and they're terrible. The television shows come out and more, there's a Netflix type of series. And it always has the same kind of diverse cast. One from column A, one from column B, one from column C, one from, and in the end we show that the new ideas are better than the old, the new colonialism. Then there are the hardcore anarchists in a traditional sense, and the atheists, and these people kind of divided up there are different kinds of atheists now. Some atheists are just like, yeah, believing in God is stupid. I don't know why anybody does it. And, yeah, we ought to respect the diversity and inclusion and equity ideas. Then there are atheists who are a lot more critical. And it's interesting. So you'll find someone like Michael Malice, who is a hardcore anarchist, believes in no government whatsoever, hates the police and everything, totally against this new ideology. Why? Because he can see its other name is authoritarianism. Its other name is totalitarianism. It just talks the talk of compassion. It does not walk the walk of compassion. But also at these times, there's the effect of Jordan Peterson, who had an effect on the atheist communities. He has simply rattled the cages. And of course, the media has gone out of its way to try to prove that Jordan Peterson is a white supremacist. And they can't do it. They try. The Kathy Newman, so what you're really saying is, idea, that what Jordan Peterson is really doing is dog whistling to all the Nazis, which is the most ridiculous thing in the world if you spent like an hour listening to one of his lectures. Yet he has had a big effect on not radicalizing, but on centralizing. He's had a centrifugal. Okay, I'm going to stop this. He's had a lot of effect of moving people towards what I would call a radical center. But then we have the rise of the Slavic world's orthodoxy in the New World. More people, Orthodox churches, if you don't know, are starting to grow in America at a hefty rate. And that's not an accident. There are more black conservatives now. There are many Cubans and other people from different Hispanic groups who are family-oriented people who don't want to use tortured phrases like Latin X to describe themselves, who don't want to abandon the rules of their language, Spanish, in order to become one of the new type of people. What's interesting, in the 1990s, you had Christians, old school right-wingers, free marketers, who were basically opposed to the gays, lesbians, psychedelic advocates, weed legalizers, left-wing political advocates, and libertarians and anarchists who could divide on either right or left-wing sides. And they were seen as opposite sides in the 90s culture war. And for a good reason. There's a lot here to... this is the origins of this culture war. But what's interesting about this what's happened on the outside the walls of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's happening outside the walls is true diversity. Because all these groups, along with all these other people I've mentioned, are all on the same side now. They are talking together. They are having the conversations, asking the questions that they should have been asking in the 1990s. They are, and why has this happened? And I think the answer is because the Hydra, the beast, is a much greater threat than the kinds of back and forths about morality and the market versus the economy, the market, and all of this stuff. And I think eventually the Hydra, its full form, will include an eco-fascist. It already does, but it isn't the main body of it yet. Will include an eco-fascist head, which will subsume all the other heads. And as Jordan Peterson said, and I included it in my recent Prophetic Voices video, when this climate change nightmare becomes the number one thing, anything goes. because people become so desperate. But it's the desperation is pushed upon them by people from the Hydra. And the more this takes over people as the number one hormone in their system, the more they will be willing to essentially do anything politically, and I do mean anything politically, to win, to beat it. So, essentially what's happened is, you look at this like a great novel. You have these two sides who are fighting, It's just like traditional marriage. No, you ought to allow homosexuality. It's like the free market. No, there ought to be more of a communal aspect. And you have these two sides fighting each other. And then there's like a child who starts to grow up, but just keeps growing and growing and growing. And suddenly becomes this giant who now they both look at and say, oh my goodness, we created this. It is got aspects of both of us in it. It's got the religious zealotry, and it's also got the craziness of, it's taken civil rights and retooled it into anti-civil rights, really. It's just that there is no diversity of thought. That's the most important thing. But down here on the other side, outside the walls of this new commanding heights, there is a freedom to discuss things that there hasn't been since about the mid-70s. I'm old enough to remember. There was more of a freedom of discussion in the mid-70s, which lasted up until the AIDS crisis in about 84. But that's gone. The media suppresses any dissent. But among the dissenters, there is freedom for a while. Now, maybe the beast will be defeated or at least pushed back. I tend to think it might be. I think there's more strength, actual strength, among the people who are dissenting from this craziness, the woke craziness. Actual individual character. I think that's what I've been seeing. Then again, they can all fall prey to propaganda. We don't know which way the wind is blowing yet. Essentially, we've arrived at a point where, that's why I've thrown my hat in with the dissenters. Because it doesn't matter that there are people with radically different views from myself. What matters is that we're all human beings. And that the sun is going down. Have you noticed it getting darker? Maybe it's because of what I'm talking about. But I think there's hope among the dissenters. And if those who believe in the new idea of diversity, the actual, which is really the old idea of diversity, of freedom of thought, freedom of association, freedom of speech, then I think there is a hope that we can at least push back, at least for a time, the insanity of this woke hydra. So I'm going to leave it there. You can probably hear my head's getting a little clogged up. It's not because I'm getting a cold, but this sometimes happens just when you talk too much. And I didn't bring any water. And, let's have hope. I often get messages from people who say things like, yeah, but there's always they have it all sewed up. And I'm going like, well, they don't have me sewed up. They don't have you sewed up. So I don't give them any more power. They haven't sewn me up yet. You're listening to me. What's sewed up? Nothing. There is always something you can do, and you should do it. And the best thing to do is swim against the stream. And the stream, the commanding heights, it's inclusivity. It's really exclusivity because it's excluding everyone who thinks differently. It is the diversity, inclusion, equity. It is the woke hydra. It is the gender cult. It is BLM. It is Antifa. It is, the ecological insanity. And by ecological insanity, I don't just mean the way we pollute the planet, which is insane, but I also mean the hysterical reaction to it, which is more insane and will kill more people in the end. But swim against all those streams. Keep your eyes set on the goal, and the goal is to remain human. The goal is to keep talking to each other. The goal is to not give up. The goal is, well, remember, anadromous means swimming against the stream. And that's what we have to do. We'll meet again very soon, I hope.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.
There you go.
What up? Bro, thanks for coming, man.
You're now podcasting out of an RV, brother.
How the mighty have fallen.
Right on time.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Look at that beautiful bastard.
Joe.
Right,
The
yeah.
show is about to begin.
Yeah.
We got Alex
It
Jones,
started.
Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, Michael Malice, Drew Hernandez. This is it right now.
This is breaking the internet.
I am